Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody out there across the world. Welcome to a brand new and long-awaited edition of Vestiges of Christianity. I am Bishop Brian Willett, coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And today, on this new edition, we're going to be just taking open discussion. There's been lots of conversations on Twitter, lots of questions coming in, and I'd like to get to them because sometimes some of your questions need depth, and we're not able to get through all of those in the limited amount of characters that Twitter allows. So today we're going to be tackling that, maybe taking some calls, and I'm going to be introducing to you the brand new co-host to Vestiges of Christianity, Joy Keeling, who is a student of mine and a very educated person in esotericism as well as Christian theology. So stay tuned. All this and more today on Vestiges of Christianity. Welcome back, everyone, to this edition of Vestiges of Christianity. I'm very excited to be back here, and I'm really even more so excited to introduce to you Joy Keeling, who is going to be co-host in this new series of episodes, as well as to introduce her as both a loyal fan on Twitter who, participates in discussion. Has watched me on Ghost Adventures, but also, more importantly than all that, she has been a student of mine for the past year and has learned some of the esoteric studies that I teach in the webinar. And so she has a unique perspective on my work. She has come to the church and celebrated Mass with us, and we work a great deal outside of the social media platforms. And that's important, because real life does exist, even though these days it seems like it doesn't because of, the way social media works. And I like to get off of Twitter every now and then and do something more authentic, and I think having a podcast like this is definitely part of that authenticity. So I've upgraded all of our systems, and part of what we're doing here today is to test out that new upgrade, make sure it all is working as it should before we start getting into the real meat of the content that we discuss on this show. And I want to also, make sure that you can hear the callers coming in, and if you are experiencing any technical difficulties along the way, by all means, let me know. Let Sister Kateri know, more importantly, because she's really one of the people monitoring the podcast for me, letting me know what's going on. And you should know who Sister Kateri is on Twitter. I don't think she has that name as her handle, but let me see if I can make sure that I'm giving you the correct handle. It's at DBSK US Fan. That's at DBSK US Fan. That is Sister Gutierrez over there. Her secular name is Brandy. And so please message her on Twitter or send her a message on Twitter. Let her know that you're experiencing issues, or even if you just want to give a compliment that everything's working great, that we like to hear too. But let's not waste any more time here, and let's introduce you to Joy. Joy, welcome to your first episode. Yeah, it's great to have you.
This is very exciting for me. Thanks.
It's exciting to have you here, and I really do appreciate you wanting to be a part of this broadcast and having an opportunity to make it more interesting. Because, I mean, in the past, Vestiges of Christianity has been mostly me talking for 45 minutes, and well, I don't mind doing that. Part of my ministerial focus is to teach people things that they might not know as much about as they would like. It also can be a little dry to hear just the same person talking over and over again for that extended period of time. So now we can get into more of a discussion. You can sort of bridge the gap for me between, all of the questions people have on Twitter and all of the things that I teach. And you're in a unique position to do that because I think you met me through Twitter, and you became a student through Twitter. So you were there at one point listening like they are to the things that I teach, maybe being fascinated by some of it to the point that you wanted to know more. You joined the webinar, you became a student, and been with me for a year. So now, you have both sides of the equation to work with, which is even more useful to this show than me. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
It is. And I like the fact that you have a good background in the academic aspects of Christian theology. That's important too. Why don't you talk a little bit about your educational background, what you've been studying, so that the audience knows a little bit about where you're coming from?
Well, I'm still in school right now. I started out in 2009. I went to the community college, and I started out as an aerospace engineering major, but over time realized that was the wrong direction, and I ended up with a degree in theology, and now I'm working on a Master of Divinity, and I'm in the final stretch. I'm really hoping to get that finished up and maybe graduate next year.
That's just awesome. I mean, it really is. My background is mostly in psychology and philosophy, and a lot of my theological studies were accomplished, I should say, separately from the conventional academic route. I mentored under a very talented priest, very educated priest for many years, and so most of my training as a priest comes actually from that experience, not so much from the world of academia. And so it's nice to have somebody like you who can maybe even enlighten me on some of the more complex academic issues that do exist within the framework of Christian theology. And so I'm looking forward to that opportunity as well in respect to where we take this podcast and what we do with this show. And like I said before, we used to only have 45 minutes, and I've upgraded the system. Now we're going to be able to give up to 3 hours per show. I don't know if we're always going to do 3 hours, but I think it's nice to have at least the option to, if we want to do a special or something like that. And we're going to cover more topics than just Christianity, and we're going to get into metaphysics. We're going to get into the paranormal. We're going to get into the heart of discussions that people really want to hear about, and no better place to formulate what we talk about than to just take questions that come in every day on Twitter. There are just so many people on Twitter that ask questions every day, and so many of those questions are things that are outside of my ability to really give detail, just because there's just so much I can do. I only have so much time. But if there's a really good question that comes in, I can write that down. I can save it for later. Sister Gutierrez can do the same thing, as well as you, Joy. You're very active.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then we can take it to the air, for the next week's episode or something of that nature. So another thing, just some logistics before we move on. I want people to know that this broadcast comes in directly from Spreaker.com. That's Spreaker.com. I used to be on Blog Talk Radio, but I didn't like their platform. It was constantly breaking down, always having issues. So several years ago, I moved over to Spreaker, and I have never looked back. It is such a better system, better sound quality. I've never had technical issues with it outside of maybe having the wrong settings set, which is really more user error than it is anything to do with the complexity of the system. But it's a wonderful podcasting service, and so now I want people to know you can connect to me directly on Spreaker, and then you can get up-to-date announcements as to when we go live. So follow me on Spreaker. Go to www.spreaker.com/Eye of the Seer. Those of you who have been following me a long time know that my old Twitter handle used to be Eye of the Seer, which was based on the original podcast that I used to give many, many years ago, which was mostly on the paranormal and occult metaphysical subjects. But now, we're going to cover everything on Vestiges of Christianity because, let's face it, there's just so much that we can cover. And so the best thing to do is to follow me there, Spreaker.com/Eye of the Seer, and then you'll get up-to-date announcements as to when we go live. You won't miss it. And then, follow me, of course, on Twitter as well, @ExorcistBishop, so that you can get the immediate tweet as to when we go live. It's another way to do it. Just make sure that you have your notifications set, so anytime that you see a tweet come in from me, you'll know that it's something important to listen to. We also have a chat room. So if you want to come in right now, go to Spreaker, sign up with an account. It's free. And then you can start chatting with us in the chat room. I'll be able to see more like a fast blast type of thing. I can see your questions come in, and then we can take your question if it's a good one. Another thing that you can do is you can call into the show if you want. But not yet. I'll let you know when to do that. But if you want to write down the telephone number, that's 802-321-0073. That's 802-321-0073. And I'll let you know when we'll start taking callers, maybe a little bit later on in the show. And it's going to take a while, I think, for people to know that we're broadcasting live, because I haven't done it in a while, and people have probably moved on. So we'll try to get the buzz going before we start, taking calls. But there is a question, Joy, that came in a lot this past week, and I think it's worth discussing.
Yes.
And you know what it is, right? What happens after we die?
Right. Yeah. That's a great question.
It really is. And it's something that I don't think a lot of people really understand when I talk about it, because I always talk from the vantage point of direct experience. I talk from the vantage point of what some great leaders in metaphysical studies have taught through their own direct experiences. This thing that we refer to in my webinar, the webinar which we refer to as Forbidden Truth, that teaches a very specific brand of mysticism that I call esoteric mysticism, my own particular model for dealing with these subjects. I always teach from that model. And I think sometimes people think that I'm just giving my opinions out there. I don't do that. And then sometimes I do, but I will say I contend that this is what it is. Or I will say we don't really know, but this is my theory on it. But when I give a statement that is very direct and might sound even authoritative, it's because I have confirmed with the circle of leaders in this field what the best possible answer is to that question. And I'm confident to be able to give it, because while everything that we talk about in metaphysics and religion and theology and in philosophy is always going to have to come back to models, we can discern that certain models are better than others. Certain models are more wholesome than others. Certain models are more accurate than others. And that in itself is important, needs to be recognized. And so I always try to give the best model that I have available to me to my audience on Twitter so that they get the best answer that I can give. And that was a little thing that we had going on today that sort of inspired me to say, you know what, we need to bring Vestiges of Christianity back. In fact, Blog Talk Radio, which is where we first started out, was initially started as a service so that people with large blog followings or people that had Twitter followings could actually communicate in a more effective way with their audience without always having to write things down or get into chat rooms or comments and have these little debates back and forth. This is an opportunity to be able to hear directly from the horse's mouth what we're talking about, and so you're going to hear it directly from me. And then tone of voice is important. There's certain cues that you can get in a conversation that you don't get when things are written down. And, Joy will tell you that I can be a bit of a hard ass when it comes to certain things. I'm kind of no nonsense about certain things. And I feel that is honestly the best way to be in approaching these things, because we actually live in a very cold and callous and indifferent universe. It is really the attributes of the divine that can be broken down into three specific qualities. One of those which is awareness, another which is compassion, and the final one which is volition. That's what separates the rest of the universe from what we can consider to be truly divine. So those three qualities are what really come back to being reflections of God, at least as close as we can get to God as is possible. And compassion being the most important one of them all, because it is how we create meaning out of the indifference of the universe. And that becomes very malleable. But it doesn't mean that you can do anything with it, and it certainly should not at any point imply that things are relative, entirely relative. There's certain aspects of creation which are relative, that is true. But when it comes to God, there are very specific ways in which to approach Him. There's very specific ways in which to experience Him. There's very specific ways in which we can interact with Him. And that comes back to how well or how firm of a grasp we have on those three qualities, compassion being the highest of them all. And in the Bible, they don't really use the word compassion so much, but they use the word love. I don't like that word as much because in the English language, love can be used for too many things. We can say that we love God, and that would be a pretty good thing to say. But the other side of the coin that isn't so advantageous is that you could say you love sushi, you love roller coasters. You can even say that you love your spouse, or you love your mother. All of those are different types of love. And I would certainly hope that the kind of love that you have for roller coasters isn't the kind of love that you have for God. And I would certainly hope that the love that you have for your family or your spouse isn't the kind of love that you have for sushi. But we only have the one word. In Greek, there's several words for these types of things. Agape being the word that is reserved for God alone. Okay? Or you could say the highest form of love, or the kind of love that He has for us. And because we don't really have a good word for love in the English language that can differentiate between those different things, I like to use the word compassion because it's more accurate. It's indifferent. It's not indifferent. It's less emotional, because compassion does not imply that we have to fall victim to senseless emotionalisms. It implies that we can have an objective and reasonable approach towards the object of our compassion. We can be compassionate without having to feel anything at all. One can behave compassionately. It does not depend upon how a person feels. So if you're in a bad mood one day, your compassion doesn't have to suffer, whereas your love might. You might get angry at the people you love. You might treat them poorly, and that would eventually become less than what love should be. But compassion doesn't have to react that way. One can always be compassionate, even when they don't feel like it. And that is why I'll use that word, particularly when it...
And that's why we're also told to be compassionate with our enemies. We don't love them. We don't like them. We don't want them around, but we can be compassionate to them as well.
That's a great point. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is exactly what Jesus is talking about when he, talks about love your enemies. He's not really saying to love them like you would love a brother. He's really saying love them in a sense that you would treat them with compassion even when they are undeserving of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's get to this question about death. Let's talk about what death is, how we experience death, and what happens after we die. But before we even get to this, and we've talked about this before on the show, but perhaps it needs some elaboration. And excuse me for my voice. I am a bit stuffy today. I had a cold this week, and my voice hasn't completely recovered. I also had a very large mass yesterday, the Solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul, and I had a baptism. So I wasn't going to chant yesterday. I was going to give myself some vocal rest, but I can't do a baptism and give it any less than all of myself. So it's too important a day. You're bringing someone into salvation, and I have to give my all. So I actually, probably chanted a little bit too much yesterday. My voice is a little raspy. So I apologize if I sound stuffy and raspy, but that's the reason why. Do I sound okay, Joy? I hope I do.
You sound fine to me.
Awesome. Okay, so, and I am going to get a better microphone now that we're going to be doing Vestiges of Christianity a little bit more regularly, and hopefully give you more episodes. So I should sound better and better as time goes on. I just have to go through and search for a good mic to use moving forward. But now let's get through some of the semantics, okay? Because semantics are always a problem. So when I talk about something like the soul, you think you know what I'm talking about, and you probably don't. Because the word soul has gone through so many different meanings all throughout the history of the word that it's almost become useless. And then, of course, you have different theologies and different denominations and different religions using the word all very differently. And honestly, the original word comes from the Greek word for where we get psyche, which is the word that we get the word psychology from. And, we would relate the word psychology. You don't think that that's spiritology, do you? You wouldn't say, oh, that's a spiritual science. No one would say that. People would say that psychology is the study of behavior as it specifically relates to a person's identity or sense of self. It's part of the operations of mind. And so we would always sort of relate it back to brain operations or brain activity. So the very origins of the word and the way the Bible itself uses it is relating back to how we would look at it today as psychology. So that's number one. The first part of semantics is the word has changed. Now it has some kind of spiritual connotation, as though it is something ethereal, something otherworldly, something that belongs from another dimension or something else entirely. Maybe it's an aspect of the divine. Maybe it's a higher self. The New Age has definitely played a role in that. And yet the authentic Christian use of the word meant nothing of the sort. It was really broken down to being one's identity of self, which was an aspect of mind which the ancients would have seen as a divine reality, because for them there was no difference between what goes on in your head and what goes on in the spiritual world. They were one and the same thing, and I feel in my in the way that I teach, and in the way that many other teachers like myself teach about this particular type of high-level metaphysics and esotericism, I feel that approach to the meaning of the word is the best approach to utilize. But we do combine it a bit, because I do recognize that there is some value in distinguishing the difference between the world of our thoughts and the spiritual world that is. And so Joy will tell you the way that I break it down to make it easier to understand is that we have the world of spirit, which I would say ultimately is actual, We call it the actuality. And then we have the rest of the spiritual world, which we would call non-corporeality. And your mind and all your thoughts and all your feelings and all those things that are part of your reality that you can't touch, you can't feel, you can't see, at least not feel in a physical sense, are also non-corporeal. So the non-corporeal world, your connection to it comes through your mind. So the ancients were right, and it is correct to say that the soul and the psyche are one and the same thing. So understand that when I use these terms, I am talking from that vantage point. I am not talking from the New Age, modern vantage point. Not typically. If I do use it, I use it very specifically. And I think that causes some confusion on Twitter because they think they know what I mean, and they don't know what I mean. And they're not students. And that was part of my motivation with bringing Joy on here to be part of this podcast, be part of this show on a permanent basis, so that she can help to maybe bridge some of the gap between what I'm teaching, since she knows it, and then how people are perhaps misunderstanding or misinterpreting because they haven't been listening to me for long enough to know how I work or operate. And I'm a flavor that might take some getting used to, and that's just the way it is. And I'm okay with that. I'm not here to make friends. I'm not here to hope that you like me even more than you might already do. And actually, if you hate me, I'm not here to change your mind on that either. I just want you to walk away from your interactions with me as accurately as possible, to have a better perspective on your chosen worldview, and not be lost in some kind of elusive metaphor for the way things are. And most people live by metaphor, whether they know it or not, whether they like it or not. So that should hopefully clarify the semantics. That will hopefully change the dynamic moving forward for those of you who do listen to this podcast, and that it starts to make good fundamental sense. So what happens after death? If the soul is really just an aspect of the mind, and it's just more or less a self-identity that is a mutable construct. In other words, we're never the same from one moment to the next. How do we interpret this? Well, we have this other thing to deal with, and that is the Eastern philosophies and how they have dealt with the concept of the soul. And their concepts go even back further than the Judeo-Christian ones. So how do they see it? Well, Buddha, Hinduism, which is perhaps the oldest organized religion still existent in the world, had a notion of soul, had a notion of how soul exists. And they would pretty much refer to that as an aspect of what they called the Atman. Okay, it was a reflection of the divine reality. And there is truth to that. But Buddha came around and said, who was also started out in the Hindu worldview, and in many ways you could say Buddhism is a heretical offshoot of Hinduism. He said there is no eternal quality that is an eternal self. Because we're never the same from one moment to the next. You're not the person you were when you were 2 years old, and you're not going to be the person you are now when you die at the age of 80 or 85 or 90 or 100 or whatever. You're always changing. We're always changing. Our concept and relationship to ourselves is changing. From one moment to the next, it's never the same thing. And so Buddha said there can't be an essential self, because we don't even have an identity that can hold together. We think we do, but we don't. And so he came up with the doctrine of anatta. Okay, that's a Buddhist doctrine that pretty much translates in English to no soul. Okay? He's not saying that you don't have a divine life force, which is how some people tend to define the word soul. He's saying there is no essential permanent identity. None. Zero. Zilch. Does not exist. It's an illusion. It's a fabrication. Does not happen. In Buddhism, what would be the closest thing to what modern sensibilities would call a soul is referred to or called the alaya. And the alaya is sort of that divine connection. That it's not a higher self, though. It's basically just divine, raw energy that is, for lack of a better word, it is an aspect of the closest thing that we can call God. But even in Buddhism, they don't really even like using that word because it is too limiting. It's almost like a type of Buddhist blasphemy, an idolatry, if you will, to even say that God is a God, because God is so much more than God. He's so much more that he's shunyata, the light of an empty room. Okay? Now, I'm using a lot of Buddhist terminology that you're going to have to go back and study yourself. Because I don't have time, and Joy doesn't have time to really kind of explain all of these things. And if you really want to know the details about them, then you really have to join the podcast. I mean, not the podcast, the webinar that I teach, because that's where all that information and details are going to be found. And I don't really have the time to devote to teaching that over again. So it's all when it's already there. So all of these Buddhist terms help to give us a further metaphysical understanding of the nature of the soul, or of the divine. Okay? So as we deal with this, and hello, Joe. Welcome to Vestiges of Christianity. Joe's in the chat room right now. Feel free to ask questions, Joe, if you want, and retweet. Let people know. Tag me on Twitter. Let people know how to get in to the Spreaker chat room and ask questions so that we get some interaction here. And like I said, a little bit later, we'll take some of your calls if any of you are out there wanting to call into the show. So we don't have time to go through and reinvent the wheel, but we can talk about some of these things. So now understand that coming from both of these worldviews, because I was once a Buddhist for more than 10 years, and I've been a Christian for even longer than that, I will say very, very delicately that Christianity really had no meaning in my life until I left Buddhism, because Buddhism gave it the meaning that I found lacking in it when I tried Christianity the first time around. And so it's sort of a way of completing the picture for me, giving me an opportunity to see through direct observation. There's really no theologies in Buddhism. Mahayana has some, even the Vajrayana has some, but they're always coming back to just ways of playing on the ultimate reality that is ineffable, beyond our ability to talk about or discuss. And I still see it that way. I see God as this way. Even in Christianity, it's no different. And I don't mind using the word God because, it does have some value, even if Buddhism doesn't or feels it's too limiting. That's okay. But let's talk about now understanding the semantics of the word, or how I use the word soul. Let's talk about what happens when when a person dies, rather. Okay. So now we know what we mean by soul. The problem is we don't really have a soul that is ours to own, ours to call ourselves, because there's no essential self. So Buddha was right. Anatta is correct. Okay? So, if we don't have a soul, then what is the soul? Well, it's actually the reverse of what we think, because we're actually looking at the divine as though we're looking through a mirror, and we see everything as it would be in a mirror in reversed. And so what we think is true is not actually true. It's the opposite of what we think is true. You get that? So when we think that we know we have a connection to something, we call that something soul. We think that soul's inside us. And even the word body, the very semantics of the word body, assumes that the body is a container. And that inside there is some kind of spiritual stuff. And that's where the eternal qualities exist. That's where our divine nature is. And that's not true. And all of the things that you think are you are not actually you. They're actually something else. And that is called a soul. But that soul is so luminous, so directly connected to the divine reality of creation, that it projects outward. Not inward, outward. Like a movie projector projecting a movie onto a screen. That screen is the ether of the cosmos. That movie is you. but you're not the projector. You're not the light that casts the projection. Okay? The source is the soul. But it's not inside you. It's outside you. And the soul projects our reality in two ways, because the universe exists in two states: corporeality and non-corporeality, physical and non-physical, the mundane world and what we would call the spiritual world. Okay? And so we have to have a nature or a reflection that exists in both of those states. So we have a non-corporeal projection, which is what we call spirit, and we have a corporeal projection, which is what we call body. And both of those things are being projected by a soul that is outside you. Not inside you, outside you. So when your body dies, so go ahead, Joy.
Bishop, one of the ways I've been thinking about it lately is because it's a reaching out and a projecting. I think of the divine light as being a tree, and each of those souls is a branch, and the branch may have many leaves on it, and we are those leaves, but we eventually die and fall off the tree. And some trees don't grow leaves at all.
I love that. That is a wonderful, wonderful way of putting it. And see, I think you're already showing what value you have here. That's just such immense value to the show, because that's a great way of putting it. And it might not have even occurred to me. And that's just fantastic. So, as Joy said, that's another way, another metaphor for looking at how, or an analogy you could say, for looking at how we should be understanding our spiritual natures. Okay? The thing is, though, because the body and the spirit are lower manifestations of this higher projection, which is coming from a greater authenticity and a closer connection to reality than what body and spirit can achieve, there is no way that body and spirit are great enough to be able to contain those qualities of soul. So, the soul's not in you, and you can't own it, but it owns you, and owns many of us, because souls are so vast that they can make many projections in many different directions. So the fact of the matter is, I don't want to sound too new agey here, but if we want to get into a little bit of the new age, you've heard of soulmates, and people like to talk about soulmates. Well, the reason sometimes that people feel a soul connection to someone that they've never met before is because there's a very good chance that the same soul is projecting both of those bodies. And the person shares the same soul reality. We call that soul families. Okay? And that's the better way of looking at it. So when the body dies, and of course the spirit will die too, because it's the same fundamental projection. It's just two different states of the same projection. The soul's unaffected. Souls are eternal, just like the Bible would have had you suggest. It's just the only thing that it's got it a little bit, not the Bible's confused, but the interpretation of what the Bible's saying is confused. Is this idea that we could own the soul, or that the soul belongs to us? No, the soul belongs to God. And this whole thing started on Twitter because somebody asked me, can somebody really lose their soul to the devil? And I answered, no, you can't give what's not yours. The devil will make you think that he can steal your soul. He can't. He can't. Not possible. Because souls are the possession of God alone, and God does not hand them out. Okay? So hopefully that answers your question. I want to say a big hi to Julie, who just entered the chat room. So Joe and Julie, welcome. I hope more of you come on in to the chat, and if you've got questions, go ahead and ask them, and we'll get to them. And I don't know if that, what I gave there is enough of an answer for what happens after death. I guess we can start to get into some of the more mechanics of it. So let's talk about that a little bit, Joy.
Sure.
We've discussed before, step by step, what happens when a person dies, and I have other episodes of Vestiges of Christianity where we've talked about that. So I want to get into it a little bit again. I don't want to rehash what I've said before, you can go back and look at that archive on YouTube or even on Spreaker, because now that we have a larger service, we have a larger database, so some of those archives can now be can remain on the Spreaker service. So you have 2 places that you can listen.
And it's all on iTunes podcast as well.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And it goes directly to iTunes. And that's awesome. I forgot about that. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
Yeah, iTunes is probably really good, because then you can just download them and listen to them at your leisure if you can't listen to the live broadcast. But we have a body that only can exist for a period of time. There's only so much energy that exists within a projection, and that's because we exist within entropy. We don't live in an ectropic universe where things are eternal. We live in an entropic universe where things go from greater and greater levels of form to increasing levels of deterioration and dissipation. And that's the nature of entropy. Any scientist can talk to you about that. And that's basically a mathematical truism. And I like those. I like truisms because they're easy to work with and handle, and it helps people from different worldviews to understand it. So your body's, you're here for maybe 75, 80, 85 years, and it dies. Okay, so what happens? Well, eventually you will start to decompose. Okay, and so that's the physical nature. And your body, having a brain, which is where all your cognitive faculties are, where all of your emotional centers are, your connection to reality, your ability to perceive anything comes through that brain. That rots away too. Your brain doesn't leave your skull and go off to some higher plane. It stays there and rots with the rest of the body. And so goodbye cognition, goodbye consciousness, goodbye intellection. It all goes away. Okay? But you have a spirit, right? Because there's 2 states of reality, 2 states of the projection. And you have body, which dies first, and spirit, the non-corporeal aspect of our illusion of self, which sticks around a little bit longer because it operates by different rules than the material world would. And in many cases, when people have not made many achievements with spiritual sophistications, whether it be through religious practice or meditation or various other high-level studies, they are attached to their body, rightfully so. The spirit, stays with the body. It's how it's programmed to be, and so even when it's dead, it will stay there. And spirit has a certain ability to be aware. It's not cognition as the brain would have it. It's not thoughts and feelings like we know it, but it is instinct. And that instinct can get stuck. And that instinct is typically what ghosts are. Okay? It's not the complete self anymore, which is why ghosts don't behave like ordinary people. That's why you can't have a really clear conversation with one, and why you typically have to go through mediums and various other things like EVP and other types of methods for communicating with the dead, because our understanding of the nature of that spiritual instinct is limited. They think like we do, but they don't have a brain anymore. It's gone. So they think instinctually. It's not even really thinking. It's more like behavior. It's more like the mimicking of recorded behavior. So it's almost, talking to a ghost is almost like talking to a recording.
I like to think of it as playing a guitar string, and you've given it a good hard pluck, and it just keeps vibrating and keeps playing out that one note over and over again, and it just keeps vibrating until it stops vibrating.
Yeah, that's another great way of putting it, and that's essentially what it is. And it's not like it can produce any more notes. It will always just produce a reflection of that initial note. But it still contains enough of the authenticity to be recognizable, but It's not the original note, and that's important. So that's what ghosts are. It's just the essence of that, the remnants, the corpse, if you will, of the spiritual non-corporeal body that remains and continues to play itself out over and over again.
And one of the things I noticed from my investigations and interacting with spirits is they tend to decompose about spiritually decompose at about the same kind of way that a body would decompose. The details get lost first, and then by the time it's all said and done, all that's left are emotions. Just like with the body, all that would be left are bones because all the soft tissue has decayed away.
Yeah, and it is just like that. And people don't understand that because, see, they are again operating under the incorrect semantics of their. I mean, sometimes people will use the words soul and spirit interchangeably. It's important to separate the two and understand them, that they are two completely separate things from a metaphysical vantage point or from a metaphysical worldview. And the eternal qualities are not there. Just because something's non-corporeal, just because something is spiritual, quote unquote, does not make it eternal. It has to be made eternal. And so, under normal circumstances, if a person has had no spiritual development, they will die and they will dissipate. And that is what the ancient Hebrews referred to as Sheol, which translates as hell, and to this day is still hell, whether you theologically realize that or not. Because, again, Dante's Inferno and a lot of the flowery language of the Middle Ages gave us this idea of hellfire and brimstone, this place of punishment, this place of torture, this place of eternal damnation, when in reality, eternal damnation is just one thing. It's death. And death is not just the physical death, but the spiritual death. Lights out. Goodbye. The atheists are correct. There's nothing after life. It's out. Over. Unless you have the grace of eternal salvation. That's where we get into what Christianity, Jesus talks about or taught regarding eternal life, regarding the kingdom of heaven. He's talking about an ectropic universe, one that is not subject to suffering and death, one that is permanent, one that must be made permanent. Because, see, he talks about the bringing of the kingdom. We're not there yet, right? I mean, we're still in entropy. We have to be made eternal again because of the original sin. And I don't want to get into all of the semantics of that because that's a whole other show. But suffice it to say for right now, and hopefully I'm being clear, and hopefully this is really opening up your minds about some of the discussions that have been going on Twitter the past few days, particularly today and yesterday. This is what I mean when I say there's no soul, that there's nowhere to go, there's no life after death, because that's the natural condition. We brought death into the world through original sin. That's what Adam and Eve, that whole story about the Garden of Eden, that's what it's all about. It's basically saying that through our disobedience to God's will, we brought death into existence, because if we had followed God's will, we would have remained eternal. We screwed up the universe, and he lets us, because that's just how much he values and embraces and supports our free will, that he even allows us to screw things up, and he won't interfere with it. But he didn't punish us. Death isn't the punishment for original sin. Death is the consequence of original sin. And so when we die, that's our natural condition, to just dissipate. And that's what Sheol is, and the pagans had their own word for it. They called it Hades. Same exact thing. Both words, Sheol and Hades, translate to English as hell. And it's only in the Middle Ages did hell start to get this new idea where you went there forever to burn. That's just a complete misunderstanding of Jesus when he refers to the fires of Gehenna, which was a trash dump outside of the city walls of Jerusalem, where people that lived in Jerusalem would burn their trash. And it's also where they used to cremate criminals. You know, they weren't worthy of a proper burial. They would just be thrown there to burn with the trash. And so Jesus is basically saying that when those that have not attained to eternal life are just going to go out with the cosmic trash, incinerated. And that's it. They're gone forever. There's no coming back from that. And that's the hell part. That's the damnation. That's the eternal part. It's not that you live being tortured for all eternity. It means that you are eternally lost. Literally. There's no recovery from that. But you can be made eternal. How does that happen? Well, it's by the complete and utter unification of body, spirit, and soul into one cohesive, permanent reality. That's what the church teaches. That's what brings us into this universe of entropy, where all suffering has ended, which is kind of how conventional Christians look at heaven. This place where you don't suffer, you don't get hungry, you don't die, you get to see your family members again, and everyone's happy, and there's nothing but love, and all of that comes from our notion of what ectropy is, this idea, the opposite of entropy, where we can enter into a state of permanence. Okay, so why would we want that? Because that's true back to our actual nature, which was designed, created by God in the beginning to be perfect. We made it imperfect, and that's essentially where things went wrong. Okay, so how do we fix that? That's where the grace of the church comes in. That's where the sacraments of the church comes in. That's where baptism becomes important. That's where the reception of Eucharist becomes important. And you might say, Bishop, but what about all the other religions? What happens to them? Well, guess what? God's grace is much greater than the church. The church is the most perfect expression of His grace, but God's grace can extend outside that. It's His prerogative to do so, and we have no right to say otherwise. So, the church is much larger than the church. And we need to understand that there's other ways in which God connects to people. If it has to be at their own level, through their own worldviews, He will do that. But there are better ways. And that's why I'm a Christian bishop, why I'm a Catholic bishop, because I feel that out of all the models available out there for achieving this relationship with God, Catholicism offers the best one. Orthodoxy as well, probably equal. It depends on which tradition you like more. Welcome, Laura. Welcome, Tara. I'm glad you guys are enjoying the show. Welcome to the chat room. If you have questions, feel free to ask. We're going to take a break here, actually. Come right back in because, honestly, it's important to kind of settle the voice when you've been dealing with a cold. But let's take maybe about a 4-minute break here. I'll be right back. This is Vestiges of Christianity. I'm here with my co-host Joy Keeling. Stay tuned. right, welcome back everyone to Vestiges of Christianity. Once again, this is Bishop Brian Willett of the Holy Nicholean Catholic Church. You probably know me from Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures if you have never listened to the show before. And I'm here with my co-host, brand new co-host in fact, who's going to be a regular now on this show, Joy Keeling, and we're taking your questions now. We're going to be taking questions directly from the chat room. You can even ask questions on Twitter. Just go to Exorcist Bishop. That's at Exorcist Bishop on Twitter, and look at the current tweet, which is the live link to this broadcast, and you can leave a comment there. You can also call into the show if you like. We'll be taking calls now, and I gave that number earlier, but I'll give it again. That's 802-321-0073. That's 802-321-0073. And we will take your questions. Okay, let's go ahead and get back to where we were at, and that I think we left off talking about the nature of death and how a person can be made eternal. That no one has an essential identity, but one can forge one into a state of permanence, and that's what the church teaches. That's what Jesus really came here to give us, and that is what we would refer to in conventional semantics as salvation. All it is permanence, folks. It's not really rocket science, but it's just trying to understand the nature of it. It is not being saved from hell. It's not being saved from punishment. These are metaphors for what it really is. And what it really is being made permanent because we have lost our permanence due to this species, which we call humanity, its disobedience to God. So Joe has a question from the chat room. We can move on that one. Could you comment on the ghost's instinctual behavior as it relates to attachments to people or objects and how to release them? Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that. Well, eventually that instinctual behavior, which is basically just raw spiritual data anyway, is that it can connect. It can actually break down into basically just an energy source that can just feed off of your energy source. Because we're just energy sources. All of us. That's what we are. We establish and connect ourselves to the universe through energy, and the universe connects to us through energy. And so when a person dies who has not either died well, is not prepared to die well, not skilled enough to die well, has too many attachments, if a person died traumatically, if a person died in a state of fear, if a person died in a state of absolute anxiety or turmoil, which is usually the case with suicides and things of that nature, those are all recipes for attachment, because that's all they know. The instinct is to attach. The last thought you have when you die is what becomes your reality as soon as you're dead. That's that simple. So if you die in a state of fear, fear is what you become. If you die in a state of anxiety, anxiety is what you become. If you die in a state of anger and hate is what you become. And those can become wrathful spirits. They become, for all intents and purposes, evil and demonic. And they can affect people. They can connect to us in ways that make us sick. And the way that that's released is, at least in that particular case, when we're talking about ghosts only, not real demons, okay, not when we're talking about fallen angels and things of that nature. But when we're talking about specifically as it relates to ghosts, a wrathful spirit can be released by helping them to remember who they were and letting them know it's okay to move on, even though they're terrified of it. Because think about it, annihilation's a pretty terrifying thing to look into. The abyss is a pretty terrifying thing to look into. But salvation is a process. Okay, salvation doesn't come overnight, and unfortunately, not everyone gets the gift of faith, which leads us in that direction. If you don't have faith and you feel like you want it, then ask for it. Knock and you shall receive. That's how it works. All right. So, Tara says energy can neither be created nor destroyed. That's create. And sometimes, unfortunately, that explanation is explained for why, there's an afterlife. But unfortunately, what it does tend to leave out is the fact that just because we know that energy cannot be created or destroyed scientifically, there is nothing in science that says that energy has to remain cohesive. So you're not just one energy stream. You are the combination of billions and billions of energy streams. And in order for you to be you, you have to have all of those billions of energy streams working in unison and correctly. Death, unfortunately, breaks those energy streams down, which is why we lose our identity and our sense of self. It's not really an existent anyway. In fact, you don't even need to die in order to lose it. You lose it as you go on. In fact, Alzheimer's and dementia is the result of too much of that energy, all those energy streams breaking down prematurely. Usually, it waits till death, but in some cases, it happens all throughout our lives, and the result is a loss of an identity, a loss of self, which is our natural condition now that we are living as a fallen species, per Judeo-Christian theology. Any thoughts on that, Joy, from your vantage point, or from the vantage point of maybe people on Twitter?
I had a thought. And then you asked me.
Oh, goodness.
One of the things I was thinking is, there are all these different things that contribute to us being who we are. And it reminds me of like a symphony playing an orchestral piece. Each instrument is contributing to that. And without those sounds, without those notes, without that contribution, it would not be the same symphony.
That is exactly true. And that's essentially what this is. Think of it as a symphony, as Joy says, and then take out the oboe, and then take out maybe some of the violins, and then eventually all of the violins, and then take out the French horns, take out the kettle drums, and eventually you're going to get down to where there's nothing distinguishable about it, and that's the type of dissipation we're talking about. Salvation, then, Christian salvation, what Christ gives us through the grace of the cross, is the means to hold that symphony together forever. It's as if he becomes the conductor. Okay? We can't do it. We don't have that power. We don't have access to a conductor. But the conductor can be the soul. Okay? The conductor is essentially the soul. When the conductor walks out and leaves, the symphony breaks down. But what if the conductor could stay there forever? That's salvation. That's eternal life. That's entropy. That's permanence. Okay? So we can use a lot of analogies to talk about these very difficult, ethereal things. And hopefully that's giving people the depth that they're lacking on Twitter. Do you think?
I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Because I know these are the thoughts that go through my head as you're lecturing each week.
See, now you're going to have an opportunity to actually engage those thoughts more, because,
Yes.
in class there's only so much that we can do, only so much time to go over those questions. But now you can ruminate here. And if we're doing them on the same day like this, it'll be easy because you'll have been stimulated by the class, and then we're going to write it.
Exactly.
Yeah, works out good. That's awesome. If any of you have questions, now is the time to call into the show at 802-321-0073. That's 802-321-0073. And you can ask us directly, or you can log into the chat room on Spreaker.com / Eye of the Seer. That's SPREAKER.com / Eye of the Seer. All one word there. And you can ask, logging in there at the chat room, you can ask questions there. Also on Twitter, go to @ExorcistBishop. And you can just click on the link to the live broadcast. It's the first one up there. And you can go and just tweet out in the comments section on that tweet and ask your questions there. It'd be a good way to interact with the show if you'd like. I'm going to go back actually right now while we're waiting for somebody to bring a new question in. I'm going to go look through some of the questions that have been coming in. Let me see what's going on here. Lots of discussions about what came on earlier in this day regarding what I said. There was confusion and concern about my saying that we don't have souls, that there's nowhere to go after we die, and these are all true because, let's face it, there's only reality, and there's only existence and non-existence. I mean, if either you exist or you don't, and existence is just here. We live in a singularity. It just feels like a very large one because we have many options, an infinite number of options, in fact, to interact with that singularity. But still, singularity is nowhere to go. And why do we need another place to go? I mean, this is large enough to contain us forever. Kelly Drott says, so if you have spent the majority of your life working toward the best possible relationship with Jesus, and I die suddenly, do I risk not getting to heaven? Well, it depends on what you mean by the best possible relationship with Jesus, because the best possible relationship with Jesus from the standpoint of a Catholic bishop would be a person who has devoted themselves to minimum 2 hours a day of prayer. I think I tell everybody, if you're spending less than 2 hours a day in prayer, you're not praying enough. And that can be a challenge, but it should be something that you strive for, at least to get as close to as possible. It doesn't have to be perfectly 2 hours every day, but it should be as close to that as you can achieve. So that's number one. Number two is by attending church, going to Mass, receiving the sacraments, getting baptized is essential. Confession, essential. Okay, these things are what give us the grace to overcome the great challenges of death. Okay, because death is a great trial. All of the pagan metaphors and mythologies surrounding the underworld are true. And even in Buddhism, the Bardo is a treacherous place. We have to forge our existence there through skill. Okay, and Christianity is really no different. It's just we don't talk about those things as much as we should. So, the sacraments, having as much grace as possible, direct relationship with Him. And if you die suddenly, then assuming you have achieved all of those things, then I would say there's very little to worry about. But again, a lot of people think they have a good relationship with Jesus, but it's actually quite a shallow one because they have been taught things like all you need to do is accept Him as your Lord and Savior, and you're all set. You've got the get out of jail free card in your back pocket, and there's nothing more to worry about. Well, that doesn't work like that. Not at all. So, yes, sacramental life, engagement at Mass, daily rosary. Then, Kelly, I'd say you are doing better than the majority of people in the church today. I really would. Because, unfortunately, I'm not seeing that as much as I should be seeing. Let's see, and we got another question here. In some countries, they make it a practice to wake up early around 4 a.m. to spend their time in prayer. They say this is the best time to talk with God. Is this true? Yes, I actually do find that the early morning hours are the best time to commune with God because the energy of the surrounding environment is more rested. And it's not as disturbed. It's not as excited. And that is important so that the connection between you and God is not stretched too thin by distraction. So I like doing morning prayer like when the sun's coming up. It's still kind of dim outside, and it's like the whole world is waking up, and I'm waking up my spiritual connection, and everything's going to be great that day because I've done that. Yeah, and I see. That is exactly what I would suggest. You want to pick a time of day that works for you. And for me, it's always been the early mornings. And people, oh my goodness, my congregation, probably wants to set me on fire and burn me at the stake for the early mornings that I put them through. On Sundays, sometimes, we start at 7 a.m. and they find that to be too early. But I think that early morning, using the divine office to call in the beginning of dawn and watching the sun rise is important to the spiritual life. It's not about convenience. Church shouldn't be convenient. Your relationship to God should not be convenient. You need to make an effort. And honestly, God's response to you is going to be always proportionate to your response to Him. The more convenient you try to make the relationship, the less connected you actually really are.
Well, the less compassion is really involved in it, if you think about it coming from our end. Because if you're just praying when you feel like it, then, I mean, is it really, how much value does it have? If you're praying when you don't feel like it and you're giving that compassion back to God, isn't that an important thing? Because you're keeping that connection open even though you really don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And that was me this morning. I did not want to do it, but I did it anyway.
I have those days too. I mean, being a bishop doesn't exempt you from it.
Yeah.
And honestly, in some ways, being a bishop maybe makes you more prone to it, because when it becomes your only professional activity, you kind of get tired of it. I mean, not like I get tired of prayer. I don't, but you get to a point where if you're not careful, it starts to feel like work, and then you feel like you're working all the time, because it's what you do all the time. It is my job. It's what I do, and I have to find sometimes I have to separate the two, and there are just days where it's like, I don't want to go down in prayer because I don't want to work today. Because that's what it feels like sometimes. And that's unfortunate, but it happens. But you have these frail moments as a human being, and then you move on. Speaking of a human being, I'm seeing this line on Twitter right now. Again, going back to all of the conversation that occurred earlier today. Somebody keeps asking me about questions about life after death, and I've given some questions, and I don't think they were very satisfied with them. And then eventually they asked me if we were good, and I said, well, you tell me, because I get asked questions all the time. I give answers all the time. Some people love my answers. Some people hate my answers. And I said they matter little to me, because my obligations on Twitter begin and end with those 2 points. I get answers, and I give answers. But I don't care if people like the answers. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to give you accurate information. And sometimes the questions that I'm being asked entail answers that are not palatable. That just is par for the course. That doesn't mean I don't like my Twitter followers. It doesn't mean I don't care about them. It doesn't mean that I'm not interested in what they think. It means that I don't care if you like my answers or not, because I'm going to give you the best answer I can give you. And if it's an unpopular, unpolitically correct answer, then it's going to be the answer that you get. That's just the way this works, okay? So somebody says, are you saying here you don't really care if we love your advice, because you're saying here, man, if I'm reading, I don't... No, I don't care if you love my advice. I care that you receive my advice accurately. You make the decision whether you like it or not, but I want to make sure that what you get is accurate, is authentic, is helpful. Okay? So it has nothing to do with, I'm not trying to be, I'm not emotionally attached to my answers, and I'm not emotionally attached to the comments that I get. If I were, then you would have seen a very different expression last week when the Church of Satan decided to troll me. And I'm going to be very blunt about that, because why not talk about it? They're coming on, they're getting upset with me because somebody posted a picture of what was, by their own definition, not mine, what the people that started the church called it, a satanistic church or satanic church. Okay, and they showed a picture of it, and they wanted my opinion on it, and I kind of was very sarcastic. I said, "Oh, lovely." And I said, and somebody came on and said, well, why are there upside down crosses? And I said, well, that's because these Satanists are stupid, because if they really knew anything about the history of the upside down cross, they know it's actually an ancient Christian symbol representing St. Peter, who was also crucified, but did not feel worthy to be crucified in the same upright position that Jesus was. So he forced his executioners rather, to crucify him upside down. And so all around the Vatican, you're going to see upside-down crosses because that's where St. Peter was executed. And, you'll even hear some evangelical nutcases saying, oh, look, see, that proves the Roman Catholics, they're really secret Satanists because they got all these upside-down crosses. And it's because people don't know anything. The Amityville Horror is where the idea that the upside-down cross is a satanic thing, that's where it came from. It came from pop culture. Now everyone believes it because, if it was in a movie, it must be true. Just like today, if it's on the internet, it must be true. And that's all I said. I was expressing that. Well, the Church of Satan caught that. I guess they follow my tweets. I don't know. And they saw that comment, and they said, well, it's not the Satanists. Those aren't Satanists. Satanists don't believe in God. Satanists don't believe in the devil. And you need to educate yourself. They started calling me ignorant, because I was using the word Satanists in a way that they objected because they feel they have the right to own the word. But the problem is they even admit that the origination of the word is relating back to a derogatory term for people who the church in antiquity saw as being Satan-like. In other words, they were not operating under the will of God. They were doing things that the church objected to, and so that became a reference as they were practicing or following after the will of Satan, because it was outside the will of God. And while I might not completely agree that you should call people who don't follow the will of God Satanists, I think there is a more than a valid argument to say that Satanists are more than just the Church of Satan, because there's two types of Satanists. You've got secular Satanists, which are, or what they would refer to as, they have another word that they prefer. I call them secular because they don't believe in God, they don't believe in spirits, they don't believe in the devil. They're basically atheists who like using the word as a form of mockery is what it comes down to. Oh, they call themselves rational Satanists. Some of them do anyway. But they want to say that they're the only Satanists. But the fact of the matter is, there are people who are what the Church of Satan refers to as devil worshippers who do believe in Satan and do worship Satan as though he's a deity, and they call themselves Satanists too. So the problem with this, is that you've got people who are using the word. Whether you like it or not, you can't change the way people use words. You don't own words. You can own the organization of a word in a form of a trademark or something, but you can't own the word. And then if you don't like the connotation that it has as a devil worshiper, then maybe you need to think about changing it. Because what the Church of Satan is doing, and excuse my language here, but I'm going to be very blunt about this. What the Church of Satan is doing is basically they're like saying, we're going to take the words asshole and we're going to call ourselves the community of assholes, but you can't call anyone else an asshole. And not only that, but asshole no longer means asshole. It means that we're good people. We're actually better than you are. But don't dare call anyone an asshole anymore, because that's not what it means, because we call ourselves assholes and we're the good guys. That's what they're doing. It's ridiculous. That was their argument. And they brought in, of course, they retweeted me, so they brought in all of their people to come and troll me on Twitter. I had enough. I try to be patient. I had enough. I had a little fun with them, but eventually I have to get back to work, and so I blocked them all. I didn't block the Church of Satan because they eventually stopped. They come back and they do more of this, they'll get blocked too. But it's the truth. Okay, so I'm not trying to be, unreasonable. But the fact of the matter is, I, in my own work, deal with people who are devil worshippers, and they call themselves Satanists. And that is the term they prefer. So don't complain to me about it. Don't come on my Twitter and start giving me a hassle over it. Go after them. Tell them that they need to change. Or, if you don't like it, change your name. But it's not my problem, and they were trying to make it my problem. So, that's the way it is. Deal with it. I don't know, Joy, what are your thoughts on it? I'm sure you saw all that drama, didn't you? Or the movie?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did, and it's funny because yeah, that's the exact same situation. Whenever I run into a person who follows the Church of Satan, which I've run into many in my life, because I used to hang out at the goth clubs, so there were a lot of people who would be into that, and they would have the same thing. Well, it's not a religion, and there's no God, and we don't actually worship the devil. I'm like, well, how about this guy over here, over in the corner who actually does worship the devil? What do you think of him? And that was just this cognitive dissonance that, they denied that these other people existed, even though they had the same name. And I'm like, but you're right across the room from each other. Why are you not paying attention? Why are you, claiming that doesn't exist when I have proof that it exists sitting right there? And that was pretty much how my 20s went, was just having that argument over and over again until I stopped hanging out with them.
And see, and that's what they were arguing. They're saying that, oh no, those are not Satanists; those are devil worshippers, and they are basically heretical Christians. It's a heretical sect of Christianity. And okay, I can argue that you could see it that way, but what you can't do is you cannot deny the fact that there is a massive group of people out there who are worshiping the devil in a religious way, in a spiritual way, in a non-atheist way. And they're using the word too. And so I was referring to them. And so, if you go to Wikipedia even, it does distinguish the difference. The rational Satanists are these like the basically atheists who like using the word as a form of mockery. And then you've got, religious Satanists who are the people who actually believe in the devil and worship him like he's a deity. And that's the kind of people that, I end up having to work with. I don't care what atheists do, do your own thing. I'm not here to change minds. I'm here to give information, let the information do its work. It's up to you after that. That's the way it is. But so that's what went on there. Church of Satan, it was a funny time. Let's see what else we got here. We've got somebody asks, does our spirit retain any of who we were when our heart was beating? Only a shadow reflection of it. Okay, only a shadow reflection. It does not contain the authenticity of it. Just basically contains an impression. Remember Joy's analogy there regarding the guitar string. Okay, it's just a remnant, an echo of the original sound resonating out. But it's not the full essence, so it's missing data. Let's see, what else we got? My religious grandfather would make time every day to go into his closet and pray. He called it his prayer closet. In one of the episodes on Ghost Adventures regarding exorcism, they captured an EVP of a demonic voice saying that it was in the closet praying. Any correlation to something that has to do with God in the Bible? You could say, there's that moment in the Gospels where Jesus is sort of criticizing the showy nature of the Pharisees, where he says, what your Father sees in secret, that's what he really wants to respond to. So don't make these outward shows. Go and close your door and sort of pray quietly in secret. You could say it's related to that verse in the Bible. But I want to say in that episode, I think it was Ogden possession.
Yes.
Wasn't? Yeah. And
yeah.
The victim in that particular case would spend a lot of time in that closet. He would go in there, and I don't know what he was doing there. Maybe he was praying, but he was in that closet a lot. So that might be why that particular EVP was mentioning it. Laura had a question and might need to scroll down to see it. Let me see. Did I already cover that? No, I didn't. I missed it. Laura asked, twin flames, what's your views on knowledge about those spiritual connections? What's their mission, their purpose? I'm assuming you're talking about, like, again, soulmates. And essentially, once again, that goes back to the way souls work. They project out many different spirits and bodies, not just one. So many people will share the same soul reality. Um, and as far as purpose, it's just basically the old occult law of like attracts like. It's not a purpose, it's just a function. And so things that resonate at a similar frequency will attract and produce things at that same frequency. That's all it is. So,
yeah, in the twin flame communities, they basically, what they're saying is that these two people share the same soul. Well, lots of people share that soul because the soul has many manifestations coming out. And that was one of the things. I did an entire podcast on of my own, just talking about twin flames. And of course I quoted you.
Awesome.
But talking about how at our level of manifestation, we don't actually experience the male-female separation. That's something that happens at the soul family level. And I brought that, out whenever people start telling me about twin flames. I remember what you said about how that's something soul families experience. We don't, as human beings, have one male and one female counterpart.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's exactly the way it works. And, so, I mean, it might not be the most eloquent concept in the sense that I think people like to think that they are having these, this divine connection, and there's they're being brought together through destiny or kismet or something. And, that's just, I mean, that's one way that you can take the perception, or you can write your own story. God allows us to do that. That's part of our natures, to create, and we create our own stories every day. If that's your story, then by all means, make it your story. But if you're talking about the authentic, actual condition of it, it's a little bit more mechanical than that. And, take it or leave it for what it is. Tara says she has to get back to work. And no problem, Tara. You know what? If you missed the rest of the show, it'll be in the archive. You can catch up to where you left off. I'm reading, more on Twitter here, and this one's making me laugh. This person's talking about me, and she says, he's a human. You can't help caring about how you are perceived, especially someone with that title and fame. No one wants to be judged badly, and the opposite is also true. How many bishops use smiley emojis? Let's talk about that one. Honestly, I don't worry about how people perceive me, as long as they perceive me accurately. Okay, I don't like to be misjudged on the basis of a false assessment. If I do something that is absolutely deserving of criticism, then by all means criticize me. But don't criticize me on the basis of something that is inaccurate, or it is a product of a false perception. As far as the emojis go, whether you guys like it or not, that's the way social media communicates. Okay, so I would not be an effective communicator on social media if I didn't use the tools that social media gives you to do that. If that's if you're feeling that is giving rise to more. Yeah. Well, let me put it this way. I'm gonna make it very simple. If the use of emojis is making you think that that's really me caring more about my persona than I do, then you're not understanding at all why I'm using it. I am merely using a modern form of communication to communicate with a modern form of communication. That's all it is. Okay, don't read into anything that is not there. I'm a very straightforward person. I do not play games. I am very direct and to the point. And Joy can tell you that. I think that's one of the things that we like about each other, is that she's like that too. Maybe it's just our personalities, Joy, but I think we mesh in a lot of ways because of the fact that we're both no-nonsense kind of people, and we don't have a high tolerance for those that try to make it more than what it is. And it's just the way it is. Look, I love my Twitter followers. I have said that so many times, I can't even count how many times I've mentioned how many I appreciate everyone. I give emoji hearts out, when I see something, because I don't feel like clicking on the like button is enough. I'll respond with 3 emoji hearts so that people know that not only did I see this, but I'm going to take the time to even acknowledge how much I care about what you said. I care about what you think. I care about what people say. I don't care about what you think about the things that I teach, because I only give facts and direct observations. I don't give personal opinions, and I don't care about whether or not you like the things that I teach. I can't care about those things, because if I cared, I would be too careful. I'd be, I can't say that. That could be offensive. I can't do that. They might not like me if I say this. How effective would I be as a bishop if I operated on that basis? How effective would I be as a teacher if I was worried about those things? That's just senseless emotionalism. I don't buy into that. Okay, so that's why I do the things that I do, and that's what I mean by when I said what I said. So Don't put words in my mouth. Don't be retweeting me and commenting on the things that I'm saying, thinking that you know what I'm saying when you don't know what I'm saying. You just heard it from the horse's mouth right here. So if you see any more of that on Twitter, make sure that you tag them in this podcast so that they can listen to it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, going up to your math teacher and saying, you know what, I just really don't like algebra. I think you're wrong on all of this algebra stuff. Well, sorry. I mean, it must suck to be you. Maybe if you knew what the, algebra, rules were, then maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal. But have you studied algebra at all? Yeah, and that's where it usually boils down to is a lot of times what I've seen is people responding to you going, well, I haven't, learned any of this and I'm not a religious person, but they think they know more about the person who basically devoted his life to it. I think that's interesting.
It is interesting. And I would even add to that observation that you just made, that I find that I will, when I encounter people that do this, inevitably invite them to join my webinar. Come and learn. If you really are this interested that you keep asking me so many questions, why don't you actually join the class and learn and get the details that you need, the prerequisites that you need to understand not only my teaching style and the kind of raw and crude way that I tend to utilize for very specific reasons, which you learn also in the webinar, but just for your own knowledge's sake. And, they don't do it. They don't make that effort. And so I can't be held accountable for that. It's there. The webinar's there. It's available to you. I don't think it's terribly expensive. It does a great service. I don't even take the money. It goes into the church. I do it as a service to the church. We try to keep it affordable, and it really helps the ministry because, as I've said so many times before, the people that are serviced by this church are usually in very severe spiritual crises and are not employed. They don't have a lot of money, and so the people that the church serves are not really in a position to even support the church. And so we have to do other things in order to be able to bring resources into the ministry. And so the webinar is one way that we do that. It also pays for the large amount of time that I have to spend working on the webinar, because that's a lot of work to put together these lectures each week and to spend time offering them, and particularly when the system breaks down and I have to teach the class over again. There's all sorts of things. So really, don't criticize what you think you know. When you don't, come and learn. And that's all I'm asking. That's what I really want to see. You want to see me get emotional about something? I get emotional about my students because they took the time to learn. And I have so much respect for that, because that's how you attain to these high-level realizations where no longer do you have to ask the questions, but you can now provide the answers. Not because you know something, not because you studied something, not because you memorized something, but because you experienced it directly. And that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's see what we got here. We got some more questions here. Do you know whether or not people affected with mental illness are affected and more susceptible to the influence by demonic entities and evil spirits. Yeah, absolutely. The more people with mental illnesses are absolutely 100% at a greater risk for a demonic or spirit attachment. Absolutely. That's just the nature of the beast, because a strong mind will usually be sufficient to protect you. But a weak mind is not. Okay, and so you have to do other things. That's where grace comes in, because how is anyone ever going to be 100% strong all the time? You can't. Okay, so you have to have grace to kind of fill in the blanks and do a little more for you. But yeah, there's no such thing as a perfect protection. We live in a fallen universe. We're fallen creatures. We are flawed. We make mistakes, and we are vulnerable. And so this is essentially why people with optimal mental health tend to not have these kinds of issues, because they're less susceptible. But that is true. Joe asks, I'm a little confused about who mediums are communicating with. They're basically communicating with the remnant shadow. Okay, these things do not. They're echoes, but it's almost like I was saying before. I don't know if you caught that, but it's like an echo. It's like a recording that you can communicate with. So just imagine. Let me give you another analogy that will help. Just imagine a ghost is kind of like watching a home video of something that maybe took place. Maybe you've got a home video of your grandfather from 1980. 5, and you're watching that home video, and you're seeing. Now, a home video is only going to let you see what they recorded, but a ghost is like being able to actually go to the person in that recording and asking questions, and they can give very simple answers back. Okay, so what mediums are communicating with, they're communicating with the shadow remnants of the non-corporeal form that we call spirit. Okay, that's what a medium is connecting with. It will behave like a real person. It will act like a real person, but it's just a reflection of a real person.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've encountered which can I go ahead and say I have communicated as a medium?
Oh yeah, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah. When I've communicated with spirits who have degraded to a particular level, all they can really do is respond with emotion, and because that's all they have left. They're just, instead of being able to communicate with words, now they're just a whisper of anger, and then gone again on the wind.
Yeah, yeah, and well, you've done some work in paranormal investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you're in a unique position to comment on this as well. Not only having worked with me, but you got to see some of this in action even before you met me. So
yeah,
you can see that the more that you talk to people who do this type of work, if they're really paying attention, those that are able to kind of step outside of the paradigm or the expectation of what they think paranormal investigation is, are able to go and take a look and say, you know what? There's a lot more going on here than I thought. Doctor Who, I don't know if anybody watches Doctor Who out there, but Doctor Who had a great episode many years ago under the David Tennant era. It was called, I think, Silence in the Library, if I'm not mistaken. It was probably the best, one of the best episodes, if not the best episode of David Tennant's era. And it was where the character River Song was first introduced, the first time that we see her. Looks like we're having a connection issue. Can you still hear me, Joy? I think I lost you there for a minute, Joy. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know. I
Okay.
think. Okay, yeah, we just had a bit of a connection issue, guys.
Okay.
It should be seamless in the archive, but yeah, there was some kind of technical glitch there. Can you guys hear me again? In the chat room, if you guys can hear me, go ahead, please let me know. Okay. Sister Kateri is telling me that you can hear me. So, so it basically, there's this thing about ghosting, where if they were using this special piece of equipment, and when a person was killed, their consciousness could be simulated in that device for a short period of time, and they could ask questions.
Hey, you turned off the lights.
Yeah, remember that? Yeah, you remember it.
Who
Yeah.
turned off the lights?
Who turned off the lights? Kept repeating themselves, and then they eventually degrade, and then they just keep saying the same thing over and over again. Remember that?
Yes, and what that reminded me of is, when I go out investigating, things I hear through the spirit box are, it's dark. Where's the light? And I keep hearing that over. And so, yeah, that episode totally reminded me of what it's like encountering dead people.
It's why you see a lot of that, and it's also, incidentally, why you tend to pick up a lot of one-word responses. It's not as common to get a whole sentence as it is to get maybe one answer, one word. We get one word typically more, or it's a short phrase. And that's because, some people say, it's because it takes a lot of energy. No, it's not really because of energy. It has to do with their ability. And the better the EVP is dependent upon how more cohesive the pattern is. The more cohesive the pattern, the more sophisticated the EVP. But eventually it all breaks down. And even hauntings eventually just end. No place stays haunted forever. Even without an exorcism or a cleansing, eventually haunting will just... the spiritual energy exhausts itself through entropy, and it dissipates, and the place is normal again. So that's how that works. Let's see what else we got here, if there's anything else. And remember, guys, you can call into the show. We'd like to hear from you. Don't be afraid. I think I gave the number. Where is it here? Let me go ahead and give it to you again. 802-321-0073. That's 802-321-0073. We'll probably... broadcast here for another 15 minutes. We'll do a 2-hour show today, and so we got 15 minutes. If you want to come back, call into the show or ask more questions in the chat room, we'd love to take your questions. I'm looking on Twitter right now, seeing if anybody is asking anything on Twitter. I'm hoping a lot of the people asking questions today are listening to this because. It's really for you guys to get a better understanding as to what I do. Twitter it's not my place. It's not my playground. Twitter is my workspace. And I take my questions very seriously, and I answer just as seriously. Sister Kateri says that Julie had a question, and Nutmeg had 2 other questions. Sister Kateri, could you repost them? Because I think I missed it. Repost them for me. Let me know who asked it, and then we'll get to those questions as soon as they come in. I'm not seeing anything on Twitter right now, but while we're waiting on Sister Kateri to get those questions out there, I just want to say, that like I said, I can't, and I want to reiterate this again, particularly if somebody is just tuning in. I absolutely cannot be emotionally attached to the questions or the answers on Twitter. I have to give you a very accurate answer, whether you like it or not, whether it means anything significant or not, because to you, what I mean, whether it's significant or not to you, because I would be doing a disservice to you if I tried to temper or censor myself based upon fear of being disliked. Okay, that's what I mean by saying I don't care if you like my answers or not. It's not that I don't care about you. It means that I cannot allow myself to be emotionally compromised, because then I will give a less accurate answer and try to give one that is more socially acceptable so that you continue to like me. If you have to hate me, but at least you hate me on the right terms. All right, Nutmeg says, is prayer in the early hours is prayer in the early hours of the morning and talking to God also because that's around the time the veil is the thinnest, and thus that's when we're closest to God? Partially.
Yeah.
Yeah, partially.
That's part of the reason I do it.
It is. And then not because the veil thins around specific times of the year as well as even within specific times of the day. It's sort of like a heartbeat. It throbs, and it has its thick points and its thin points.
Yeah, and the morning and the sunrise and sunset are when those transitional times, the liminal space is great for prayer during those times.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's that in-between areas.
Yes, it is. And so just as it thins around Halloween to a little bit after New Year's Day, and then again it thins again around Holy Week and Easter, and then it thickens up very quickly after that. It also thins around, times a day. So around midnight to 4 or 5 o'clock tends to be the thinnest time, and that's why you tend to have increases in supernatural activity. Any paranormal investigator is going to tell you that the best captures are after midnight, just the way it is.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Are people who suffer with mental illness considered to be closest to God? And if the Bible says God gave us a sound mind, then why do people suffer with weak mindedness? No, there's no real connection there. Mental illness is more of a physical malady than it is anything else. It's a dysfunction within a person's brain, or it is a dysfunction within their the operations of the chemical operations, which can sometimes be induced through trauma, but can also be just natural dysfunctions, and has nothing to do with whether or not they're close to God. And it's no more than you can say that a person that has epilepsy is closer to God, or a person that has cancer is closer to God. It's just a physical malady. It happens in entropy. And if God gave us sound-mindedness, then why do people suffer with weak-mindedness? Well, because it needs to be cultivated. God doesn't do the work for you. God gives you the means to do the work for yourself. Salvation, Jesus didn't die on the cross to save you. Jesus died on the cross so that you could be saved. That's different. People misunderstand it. Again, everything comes down to how you use words and what you mean by the words that you use, and being very carefully when you are interpreting something. And that's where some of these misconceptions come from. Meg also asked, but if the Bible says that... Oh, no, wait. That's another one. Julie asks, is being a medium come as a natural gift? Most of the time it does. It can be cultivated, and it can be made more sophisticated. But most of the time you have to have a natural proclivity towards it in order to achieve it.
Yeah, there are some people who receive either a physical or emotional or psychological trauma that happens later in life that may awaken some mediumistic abilities. But if they weren't underlying to begin with, then that wouldn't happen. So there has to be some kind of basis there that the person would have a natural proclivity to it. Now, I do think that anyone, if they try hard enough and put enough work into it, they can learn how. But having lived with it my whole life, why would you want to do that?
Yeah, because once you shut down the psychic sensor, we call it a psychic sensor. It's kind of a term that's used in some esoteric circles and kind of an accurate term, so I like it. That's what filters out all of the spiritual data that we're exposed to. Otherwise, you'd go crazy if you saw it all. But once you shut that down, and being a medium is sort of like partially learning how to shut that down, at least in part. You can't ever put it back up again. Okay, so once you wear away your psychic sensor, you don't get it back. And you can't put a new one in, and so you'll always be exposed to it. So typically speaking, I would say if you're not a medium, don't try to become one. If you are one, learn how to better, more skillfully use the ability, because it can lead to all sorts of emotional and psychological and spiritual traumas that can be problematic later on in life, and then you might end up needing to become a client of mine. We try to avoid that. I like primary prevention. It's usually the best way to handle these things. Let's see, what do we got here? Kelly asked, does that mean that then we have to do the work to be saved? Jesus opened the gates, but not everyone can go through, correct? That is correct. We don't do the work of salvation, but we work out our salvation. Okay, so we can't save ourselves. Only grace can do that. And the way that we cultivate grace is through faith. So St. Paul wasn't lying when he said, that salvation comes not through works of the law, but through faith. But St. James was also correct when he said that faith without works is dead. Okay, so it's not sufficient to just believe that Jesus did the work for you. You have to actually accomplish something with that grace. You have to cultivate it, which is not just a relationship with God directly, but it's also helping others to do the same. We are here in this together. We are the church, and the church gives grace. And we are the church. Okay, so we have to share that grace, express that grace. If we cultivate more grace, we can give that grace to others, both living and dead. And so that's what it means by working out one's salvation. One has to be a good person. One has to perform the corporal works of mercy. One has to perform works of charity. You're not exempt because, Christ did all the work. No, he didn't. He only opened the gates. But you have to be able to walk through on your own 2 feet. That's where the cultivation comes in. That's why the Roman Catholic Church has always taught that salvation is achieved through faith and works, because you need to be exercising both, but they're not works of the law. So when Paul says that the works can't save you, he's not talking about charitable works. He's not talking about the Beatitudes that Jesus spoke about. Okay? He's talking about the works of the law. He's talking about Levitical law. He's talking about, not eating shellfish. Yeah, that's not going to save you. Okay? He's not talking about, stoning homosexuals because, they're disobedient to God. Yeah, that's in the Bible. Yes, that's a part of Levitical law. That's not going to save you. So don't do it. Okay? And that's, hopefully that answers the question. Joy, anything to add on that you can think of?
Oh, gosh.
It's so much to say. But
yeah, I was in the zone listening.
It's a good place to be. Nutmeg asks, is God the universe? Well, I would say more accurately, God is the cosmos, and he's everything the cosmos is, and he's also everything the cosmos is not. Okay, so it's yes, but more than that. That's the answer to that question. Kelly asks, this is what I think many people don't get about the crucifixion and him dying for us. You are absolutely right. Getting back to that last one, people think that his dying on the cross, that was it, done, nothing to do, nothing to merit. It's about not meriting the grace. Okay, we can't merit the grace. All right, the doors to heaven were closed. Original sin locked us out from the Garden of Eden, right? That's the angel cast out Adam and Eve and stood there as guard, not letting them back in. That's a metaphor, again, for the idea of the gates of heaven being closed to us. Christ's blood on the cross opened up the gates of heaven again. We now can come home. That's all that means. But we have to still get there. You got to walk through you got to travel back. It's like, think of it this way. Jesus bought you a brand new Rolls Royce, but now you have to go get a license and get in that car and drive it safely to your destination. The cross is the Rolls Royce. It's a nice, luxurious, comfortable ride, but you still have to drive there. You still have to know how to drive there. That's the difference between faith and works, and that's why they always come together. Lots of analogies today, Joy. I think that...
Yeah, I know.
Great questions, guys. Great questions. And once again, we can maybe take one more. We get time for one more. If somebody wants to call into the show, again, that number is 802-321-0073. And you can do it on Twitter at @ExorcistBishop or within the chat room itself on Spreaker. Okay, I can take one more question. And then we'll have to start closing up here. No more questions? Nothing? People are thinking.
Well, that's the point, isn't it?
It is the point, and hopefully that's usually good. It's good when you're talking to a quiet room, because it means that people are actually lost in that zone, and maybe you've made an impact. But I really want to just go back to the kind of the dramas on Twitter today and say, look, guys. I really do love my Twitter followers. There's no question about that. Why would I spend so much time on Twitter And I do. I spend more time on Twitter than I should. I don't get half as much work done as I should because I spend way too much time there. Why would I do that if I don't care about you guys? All I said was, I don't care. I don't care about what you think about the answers because I have to give the correct answer regardless of whether or not it's palatable. Okay? I just want to clarify that. I want to make sure that's clear. And if any of you out there see anybody, getting back into this, tell them to listen to this podcast, connect them to the archive, or you can quote me what I just said. Okay? Let them know because you guys see more than I see. I get too many coming in to answer them all, and I miss a lot of questions, and that's just unfortunate. But looking ahead, it looks like there's no more questions, so we're just going to basically say this. Joy and I are going to be doing this on a weekly basis, or at least most weeks, okay? And we might even, Joy, if you're up for it, we can even maybe do another one tomorrow. We'll see how it goes. But
I will see.
Yeah, but we wanted to give you this this opening broadcast, bringing Vestiges of Christianity back, new co-hosts, better topics, more discussion, more interaction with Twitter and the people that enjoy the types of things that I talk about. So we're going to be doing this mostly on either Friday or Saturday afternoons, usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That's going to be the majority of these live productions. Of course, everything gets recorded and archived and will be available on YouTube and iTunes, as well as on the Spreaker platform channel as well. So there's lots of ways to listen if you can't listen to the direct broadcast. But remember to follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Spreaker. Follow me on Twitter for the link when it comes up. That way you'll never miss a show when we go live. And you can come into the chat room. You can ask questions. You can ask questions. You can call into the show. All of that. It's going to be great. Let's see if I can answer. We've got a couple more questions. Let me see if I can answer them quickly before we run out of time. Was Jesus an ascended master? No, Jesus was the Son of God. I don't like the term ascended master because it kind of implies that he was just one amongst many. He's not an avatar as much like what we would see in Hinduism. He's truly the Son of God. And then she says, did the Vatican take parts of the Bible out of the Bible in order so people would see just how human he was? No, they did not. The Vatican didn't exist when the canon of Scripture was put together, and not in the way that it exists today. And the canon was chosen based upon the orthodoxy of its teaching, and whether or not it met the criteria that was established when Constantine called the Council of Nicaea, in Nicaea in 325 AD. Okay, so if anything that fell outside of that theology was not put into the canon. Joy, thank you so much. Everybody,
it's been a pleasure.
It has. I thank you all for listening to this edition of Vestiges of Christianity. Until next time, this is Bishop Brian Willett with co-host Joy Keeling thanking you, and we will see you on the next edition. Take care. God bless everyone, and good night.